There's a little-known part of Hollywood that most people are not aware of, known as the audience test preview. The recently released book, Audienceology, reveals this for the first time. Our podcast series, Don't Kill the Messenger, brings this book to life, taking a peek behind the curtain. And now, join author and entertainment research expert, Kevin Getz.
Who remembers "It Had to Be You, Wonderful You," or "Dream a Little Dream of Me"? How about "My Buddy" or "Makin' Whoopee"? These are just some of the songs written by Gus Kahn, who is my next guest's maternal grandfather. His paternal grandpa was Groucho Marx. Imagine growing up with those two grandfathers who came from the golden age of Hollywood, sharing their stories. Well, Andy's here today to tell us stories from the inside. Andy himself is an accomplished Renaissance man. He's a writer, he's a producer, he's a composer and musician. He's an extraordinary artist and photographer. I mean, he kind of does it all. And he's a great raconteur, and I'm so excited to have him here today. He's a dear friend, and we're going to have some fun. Please welcome Andy Marx. Hey, buddy.
Well, thank you, sir. And when you said "my buddy," you mentioned another great Gus Kahn song, "My Buddy."
My buddy, that one, my buddy, my buddy.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
My buddy.
Andy, it is so good to have you here.
Well, I'm delighted. Everything you say about me, I say about you, because you're really the multi-hyphenate man who basically does everything. So
You do everything well.
I don't know about that, but so do you.
Well, thank you.
Every time I hear you doing another thing, it's like, yeah, of course he is.
Well, Andy, you're not the guest that I would normally say, come on to a show, a podcast to talk about movie screenings, because it's not typically what you do. But you have, over our scotch and cigars and other things, you have shared with me so many wonderful stories that were passed down to you from your grandpa, from your dad, and of course you're married to another great friend of mine, someone who I consider one of, if not the best, marketing executive in the movie business and entertainment business as well, Terry Press. And the idea that you have been affected by test screenings is unquestionable. I want to remind our listeners that test screenings, began in the earliest days of Hollywood, when people like Charlie Chaplin and Buster Keaton and Harold Lloyd would take like their comedic sequences up to Hollywood Boulevard and test them out with audiences just to see how they played, how they landed. And it's funny because I think about how they did that, and the way they did that often was they would piggyback their sequences after a feature played in a movie theater. They would go to the manager and say, hey, can you leave the audience here while I just stand in the back and listen? And that's what they did. And it was great, great early learning. And so in that time period, the Marx Brothers, I guess, who were very big in vaudeville, entered the movie scene. And I know that you have a few stories to share with very similar kind of outcomes, right, with gaining this audience feedback. Can you share some of those with us?
Yes. And actually, although you say, I'm not quite, in the ballpark of the audienceology people that would be coming on, I did grow up in Hollywood. So, I was a publicist for many years, and I was a journalist for many years. So, and especially when I was a journalist, we were all fascinated by the whole research thing. And that was about when I was working Variety in the 90s was kind of about the time, that you were making your mark. And, it was such a secret thing. So, and I remember, growing up and going to previews and things. But
you mean sneaking into previews?
I never did the sneaking. I never did the Jeff Wells thing. I think he was the one that was sneaking into. I never did that.
Because you were in the industry. You're not supposed to have anyone. We don't allow people in the industry to attend our test screenings.
All of a sudden, there became this big, again, and I would say it was in the 90s when I was working at Variety, there became this incredible fascination, even early box office.
That's right.
That's in the 80s. And then the whole thing about the screening thing, that became the complete object of fascination for reporters, and it also grew as the whole methodology of what you guys did grew, and it turned into a whole thing. But regarding the Marx Brothers, I will tell you two great stories.
Oh, please.
So you talk about, Chaplin and Keaton, I believe, or I don't know. I wasn't aware that Chaplin did it, but I know Keaton and some others.
And Lloyd, Harold Lloyd. Harold Lloyd did that sequence, in The Navigator, where he directed a school of fish underwater. Right. And it was so innovative, and it didn't get laughs because people were so blown away by the fact that he, did this thing that no one had ever seen on film. And so he cut it. Yeah. Well, the Marx Brothers actually, of course, they did test screenings, which I'll get to that in a minute, but they did something that actually almost one-upped what the other ones did was when they got dropped at Paramount, their last movie had been Duck Soup. How do you drop the Marx Brothers after Duck Soup, by the way? Well, the movies, a lot of people, there's sort of mistaken information where people think that Duck Soup was a huge flop, which it was not a flop. No, I thought it was a hit, actually. No, it was not a hit. The movies, as the years went on, as each one, because remember, Animal Crackers and Coconuts were based on well-known Broadway shows. Aha. Then they did, Horse Feathers, Monkey Business, and Duck Soup. And, the grosses were starting to go down, and they got dropped. So after Duck Soup, they got dropped, which is ironic that, Duck Soup is now, by many people considered, to be the greatest Marx Brothers movie. Exactly. That's where I was going. But so funny. It's almost like that Van Gogh story of not selling paintings in his lifetime, Exactly. So anyway, they got dropped by Paramount. And luckily, they ended up, Chico Marx, who was a gambler and a bridge player and a card player, used to play in a card game with Irving Thalberg, who was running a division of MGM under, Louis B. Mayer. And Thalberg saw potential in the Marx Brothers, and he convinced the boys to come over to MGM and make a movie. And they actually, between Paramount and MGM, Zeppo Marx left the act. And here's a funny story. When they were negotiating the new contract at MGM, Thalberg said, hey, well, you guys are only 3 brothers now instead of 4. I really feel that I should be paying you less since there's one less brother. And Groucho said, are you kidding? Without Zeppo, we're worth more. So anyway, that went. Although Groucho often said that Zeppo was actually the funniest Marx brother, although you never saw it on stage. He apparently had the best wit of anybody. But, by the way, before you go on with that story, Andy, I have to ask you something. Was your grandfather funny to you, like in life, or was he a different guy? He was both. But again, he sometimes would be grumpy and grouchy. I can remember times once when I wanted to do a bunch of Marx Brothers bits that I had memorized from movies. He got very mad at me. He said, I don't want, this was in the late 60s when the whole sort of thing was, the Marx thing was coming back. And he said, that's all in the past. I don't want to talk about that, and blah, blah, blah. Another time, when I was a student at UCSB, I was doing I wanted to do a paper on the Marx Brothers. So I interviewed Groucho, and I brought a tape recorder. And he said to me, I don't let Life magazine tape record me. I'm certainly not going to let you do it. So, he could be that way. And he was serious. He could be sort of grumpy and grouchy. But, he also, would say funny things. I think he had the typical sort of, I don't think Steve Martin is probably rip-roaringly funny when he's not, when he's just out and about. A lot of these guys are, they have that sort of dark personality. Was he affectionate to you? Yeah, he actually was. He was. I had a really, really great, relationship with him. During the last couple of years of his life, I got myself a job basically archiving all the You Bet Your Life shows. Oh, well, actually, Lord, that's fantastic. Well, don't you know that whole story about how he saved? No. If you just Google how Andy Marx and Groucho saved You Bet Your Life, you'll find the article. And so what happened was we were up at lunch one day. I graduated from college, so this was we won't say the year, but sometime in the 70s. No, I guess it was 73. I graduated from UCLA. Okay, so I was up at the house having lunch. At the lunch were Elliot Gould, Jack Nicholson, and the great French mime Marcel Marceau. Oh my Lord! And I remember the other guys were drinking wine, and Jack Nicholson or somebody said, hey, let's do a toast. And then Marcel Marceau said, well, I don't drink, but I'll mime the wine. And he mimed drinking wine.
Can you imagine?
Oh.
Marcel Marceau is doing mine.
And Elliot Gould at that time was one of the biggest box office draws,
Right,
wasn't
with Groucho, and so was, I mean, Nicholson was just kind of starting his rise. I think what was the movie? Was he in? I always confuse.
Cuckoo's
Was he in
Nest.
The Last Angel or Cinderella Liberty? Both of them were like Navy movies, and he was in one of them. But his career was just coming up. So they were there for lunch. Phone rings, and I, run to pick it up. Groucho said, go get the phone, and it's somebody from like NBC calling from like Englewood, New Jersey, and he goes, "Hi, is Groucho, Mr. Marx there?" And I go, "No, this is his grandson. He told me to, take the call." They said, "Oh, well, we just wanted to tell you that we've got a warehouse full of You Bet Your Life episodes." At this point, I think it was actually called The Best of Groucho because it had been syndicated. And they said, "We have a whole warehouse of this, and we're going to destroy them all unless you like them." So I run into the room, and the group is there, and I go, "Hey, Grandpa Groucho, NBC's on the line. They're gonna destroy the films unless we take them." And Groucho goes, "I don't want them. Who cares?" But then Nicholson said, "No, you got to take them." So we all agreed.
Oh, my Lord.
I run back to the phone, say to the guy, "Okay, send them all out here." And I don't really know how much stuff is coming. He goes, "Okay, well, UPS them. They'll be there next week." So next week shows up, literally 7 UPS trucks pull up into Groucho's driveway with literally, like, I would say probably 100 boxes of film cans of You Bet Your Life.
Oh,
and they're literally in every closet room, the housekeeper's room, the whole thing piled up to the ceiling of these episodes. So now we're going like, what are we going to do? At that point, there was a producer of the original show, a guy named John Goodell, and I said, "Hey, we have all these films. Why don't you let me go? I'm going to hire myself as the archivist." So he actually hired me to archive all the films, and then we went and we made a deal at KTLA to start screening them, and then they became syndicated.
Oh,
and
wow.
It was kind of a hot thing in the early 70s. So now I had a job, which was kind of cool. And my job was going up to Grandpa Groucho's every day because he had a 60 millimeter screening room, and literally going through every reel of film that had been delivered. And I would just sit and watch these shows. And then Groucho would like come out of his room and have lunch. And this is during the period of when the whole Groucho mania is starting. I'm literally at the house every day for lunch. And then we would watch a few episodes. But at those lunches, like Alice Cooper would come for lunch, and Queen, and,
Alice Cooper and Queen.
Well, not on the same day, but.
No. I mean, that's just, it just doesn't seem like that would be a fit.
Queen came for lunch and gave Groucho 2 platinum records from their 2 albums, A Night at the Opera and A Day at the Races, because those were 2 albums that they named after Marx Brothers movies.
Oh, my gosh, that's right.
The reason they called it A Night at the Opera was because it had Bohemian Rhapsody on it, and that was very operatic. And then the next one, they just said, "Oh, we'll call it A Day at the Races."
Do you have those still?
No, I don't know where those are. I think they're probably in the Smithsonian or something. I have no idea where they are. So,
all right, wait. Let me bring you back to MGM, to Groucho, Thalberg saying,
okay.
we.
So they're sitting around, and they've now commissioned George S. Kaufman, the great playwright and writer, to. A guy named McGinnis had written a story for A Night at the Opera, and they got, a couple of different people worked on it. So then Irving Thalberg came up with the genius idea. This is why he was called the boy genius. He came up with the idea, which again, as far as I'm concerned, I don't believe this was ever done. He said, "We're going to take the comedy scenes from A Night at the Opera, which include the world famous stateroom scene. It also includes the very famous contract scene and some other scenes. And we're going to take them out on the road, and you're going to perform them in front of live audiences so we can see what works." So that actually precedes taking a piece of film and showing it to a movie audience. They took actual scenes and performed them in front of audiences.
Andy, we have a product at my company, Screen Engine ASI, where it's called Test Drive, and what we do is we bring in professional actors, and they do a live table read, essentially.
Right, I know about that, which is incredible. But can you imagine you're living in Seattle, and you're going to go see a performance by the Marx Brothers of them doing a bunch of scenes
Unbelievable. But doesn't it make all the sense in the world? Because before you shoot a frame of film, then you have all this intel. And you know what it harkens back to? It harkens back to Harold Lloyd and Chaplin and Keaton.
But this actually did it one better. It did one more thing, which is, think about it. When you do a comedy, if it's not done just right, and there's a lot of laughs, you miss dialogue. Okay, because so what they did was they learned the timing.
The cadence, the timing, yeah.
Of when to not go to that line yet because there's going to be a huge audience laugh. Okay. And when you go to see A Night at the Opera with an audience, you pretty much don't miss almost a word of any jokes or anything because it was shot exactly to that thing.
Oh, wow. Did they test that movie?
Yes, they did test the story. And here's a good story, which I know.
The movie, yeah.
Which I know you'll appreciate. So again, a little backstory. Louis B. Mayer and Groucho hated each other. And of course, Louis B. Mayer was running MGM at the time, and Irving Thalberg had his own division at MGM.
Metro.
So he could kind of do whatever he wanted to. And that's why he was able to sign the Marx Brothers, because Mayer didn't like them. But Thalberg said, you got to trust me. This is going to work. This is going to be great. And they're going to be good. And, Thalberg, Mayer did not like and really hated Groucho. So anyway, they got the movie all done, and they decided to have a screening in Long Beach. And they went to Long Beach, and they screened the movie A Night at the Opera, and it did not test well at all. And basically, standing around outside, were all the executives, Thalberg, Mayer, everybody. And Mayer was kind of gleefully, he was kind of lording it over everybody. I told you that these guys stink, and this movie is going to be a flop. And Thalberg, you were wrong, and the whole thing. And Thalberg notices that across the street is another movie theater, which is playing, I believe, like Abbott and Costello stuff. So Thalberg goes over to the other theater, convinces the manager to run A Night at the Opera right then. The guy agrees. They all troop over there, and they had the audience in there for, there was already a comedy audience in there, and they said, hey, we're going to screen this new Marx Brothers movie. And they did it. And it went over huge. So you had one theater saying the people didn't like it. You had the other theater where they loved it. And, as it turned out, the movie was much beloved. It was, other than Duck Soup, is considered the greatest Marx Brothers movie, ever made.
It does speak to recruiting the right audience. You want to get an audience that are predisposed to not rejecting a movie initially. And of course, you had a comedy audience across the street that was absolutely predisposed. And so that was a very, very smart thing that Thalberg did.
Yeah, amazing. Can you imagine if they had some really depressing movie? That worked. So, but again, the second audience was right, because it is one of the most, beloved comedies of all time. And, again,
did they ever see eye to eye, Groucho and Louis B. Mayer, or?
I don't think so.
How long were they there at?
They were there. Well, what happened was, so their protector was Irving Thalberg, which was fabulous. So then they made.
And he died.
Right. So the next movie that they made was A Day at the Races, and in the middle of A Day at the Races, Thalberg died.
Oh, Lord.
So A Day at the Races is, if Night at the Opera is a 10, I would say A Day at the Races is an 8. Okay. And then unfortunately, now one thing I do love about A Day at the Races, though, is that my other grandfather, who you mentioned earlier, Gus Kahn, wrote songs for A Day at the Races, including one of the all-time great jazz standards, All God's Children Got Rhythm. And he wrote that with Bronislaw Keaton, who wrote another standard.
You have a piano there?
I do, but it's like, not really this one.
I was wondering if you could play a little. Can you play it on the ukulele?
No, but it's,
hear a little?
All God's Children Got Rhythm. All God's, it's a very, go listen to like the Tony Bennett version or something. It's really.
I'm going to get you to play ukulele.
I'm going to play. I'll play something else. I just don't happen to know that one.
I'm going to take a break, and you and I are going to discuss on the break exactly what what you're going to play. We'll be back in just a moment. Stay with us.
Get a glimpse into a secret part of Hollywood that few are aware of and that filmmakers rarely talk about. In the new book, Audienceology by Kevin Getz. Each chapter is filled with never-before-revealed inside stories and interviews from famous studio chiefs, directors, producers, and movie stars, bringing the art and science of audienceology into focus. Audienceology, how moviegoers shape the films we love. From Tiller Press at Simon & Schuster, available now.
We're here with Andy Marx, my buddy, my friend, and just the most talented photographer, pianist, musician, writer extraordinaire. He's truly one of those Renaissance men, and I adore him for that, and we just have a ton of fun when we get together. Andy, you were down at my place in Palm Springs during the holidays. He started playing on the piano. My piano was owned by Herman Hupfeld, who wrote the original As Time Goes By on that piano.
Yes, now I'm going to scold you, though. You need to get that piano worked on. You have one of the most,
Andy, I know you can only do so much. You can only do so much with it, but
no,
it is.
You need to get somebody down there. That whole piano could be whatever. I mean, that's what a great.
I know.
I have Gus Kahn's piano, and I take good care of it.
Well, I take good care of mine, but it's the desert weather. But Andy, we had a ton of fun and sang and played and all of that.
That was so fun.
Andy, as a writer, I'm curious to know, go back to that time when you were starting out at Rogers & Cowan and working as a unit publicist on so many movies. Were test screenings part of the conversation? I know you mentioned there was it was a secret thing, and everyone wanted to get intel and information. Were you ever informed as a journalist or as a publicist from a test screening? Do you remember any of that?
Well, I mean, I worked at Warner Brothers. I was there when Richard Del Belso was there.
Richard Del Belso was one of the people that I think he came from Gray Advertising. Is that right?
It was funny because when I started as a junior publicist at Warner Brothers was in the early 80s, and it was Joel Gray, Sandy Risen.
No, Joel Wayne.
I mean, Joel Wayne.
Joel Gray, after his Oscar, he decided to go into marketing.
Yeah, he did.
But wait a minute, it was Sandy Reisenbach that brought everyone.
Right. And so Richard Del Belso was there. So of course, that was the whole, that was probably the first time I ever knew, although I do remember at Rogers and Cowan, Paul Block, another great, who's
great guy,
no longer with us, but he hired me. I remember that Elliot Gould was a client, and I remember, I don't remember what the movie was, but I remember going, I believe it was a Western, and we went, I remember going to some kind of a screening for this Elliot Gould movie. But again, it was so different then.
You and I share something as artists. We're both from creative backgrounds, and it's where we sort of come together as friends. What amazes me, and I'd like your take on this, are directors, particularly directors, who resist the screening process and who claim that, it kind of impedes their vision, their creative vision. And I'd like to know how you stand on that issue, because I have a very particular opinion about it myself. But
well, I can probably guess your opinion, and I believe it or not, I would side with you because
I do believe it. But why? Why do you side with me?
Well, because I think if the director wants to go off and shoot a movie on his iPhone, and everybody, and make a movie for $20,000, when you're talking about huge sums of money, $50 million and add it, it's unfortunately, I don't care what you say about movies, it's a product, and you can be as artistic and whatever as you want. When you're in the game here, that at your level, it's a product. And, I remember once I was in a meeting when I got hired to be the unit publicist on Above the Law, which was the first Steven Seagal movie. And I remember we all got summoned to a meeting at Warner Brothers, and, Rob Friedman was there. I think at that point, I guess Sandy was still there, but anyway, Rob was there, and this was kind of Rob's thing. And, and Steven Seagal was there, and Paul Block was there, and I always remember that, Rob Friedman saying, movies do not have a particularly long shelf life. If they don't catch on in the first weekend, he was sort of explaining this to Steven Seagal, who was new to this was his first movie. He'd never done anything. He did Michael Ovitz's Karate Teacher. He got this role in this movie. And, he was sort of like, oh, well, can't we just, let it play out for a while? And Rob said, no, you literally have a weekend for a thing to catch on, and that's it. But I've always kind of remembered that. And, it's true. It's not like a fine wine that ages.
I like to tell directors who are cynical, or any person who's cynical, to embark on a test screening process is, audiences will help you to actualize or like bring your vision into better clarity than not having it, and as a result of people sometimes not testing, I've noticed a real indulgence. If the audience doesn't have a voice at the table, I'm not saying that it's you dumb anything down. I'm saying that what you set out to communicate may not actually be what was communicated. So the audience is in fact saying, I'm really disappointed by this ending. It doesn't have to be a happy ending, but you had me on the edge of my seat for 2 hours, and then you just sucked the air out of the room, essentially, right? And that was a bummer.
That Fatal Attraction.
Well, that's one of many. I mean, ending stories.
You have to remember the creative people. They don't like anybody telling them, because they think what they're doing is the greatest thing. Everybody who's creative thinks whatever they're doing is the greatest thing they've ever done, and it's great, and it doesn't need any work. And they don't like anybody telling them, that it could be better.
Well, to your point, our art form in movies is not just about the director and or producer's vision, right? It's also could not be possible without many artists contributing. It's a different kind of art form. So you have...
And all that money.
Well, I didn't go there yet, but you have production designer, editor, cinematographer, and art director. All of those very key people, even the casting directors, are integral to the success of a movie. And so to think of it like a painting, if you don't like your painting, you put it in the back of your closet. If you, if you write a novel and you don't like the novel, put it in the back of your drawer, but not a movie. And then you have the financial component and somebody else financing your movie. Yeah, they get a voice if they hand you $50 million to make the most commercial product. It doesn't mean you have to sacrifice integrity or the vision. I actually think it could make it more realized. And that's my whole pitch whenever I speak to people who are cynical. So I think you're right. You keep saying those creative. Well, as creatives, as you and I, if we had a movie, we would welcome the fact that we would have some audience feedback to guide it, not to make final decisions, not to be the end-all, be-all, but to inform. I mean, what's a screening except information gathering, right? You're getting information, and then you can choose to act on it or not.
Absolutely. Although I do think, because you use us as an example, but maybe to get to the point of somebody, like Michael Bay or to be those people, maybe you just have to have the giantest ego of all time. Okay. And obviously, if somebody handed me, let's say I wrote a script and somebody said, hey, this is great, I would love you to direct it. I'd love to, I would welcome anything that would help make the movie better. Again, to be like Jim Cameron, you probably have to be in a completely different mindset where you're going, I don't need anybody to tell me, what.
Yes, but Michael Bay, Jim Cameron, Marty Scorsese, they really embrace audience feedback. And I think the great filmmakers do. And if you go back to what we talked about earlier in the old MGM days, and from Billy Wilder and Ernst Lubitsch and William Wyler and John Ford, they all tested their pictures.
Right.
They all sought audience feedback. I think it's an arrogance by some sort of holdover of the auteur of the 70s that thinks that audiences will somehow damage their movie. But I think that it's the opposite.
I think the other thing that's kind of different now than back when you talk about people like John Ford and those people, think of the output that those people did. Now when somebody, again, take anybody, Scorsese or anybody, it's like 4 years, it's years between each project. When
that's right,
the system existed, John Ford made a movie and he was on to the next one. And that's not to say that he didn't take an interest, but he wasn't just laser focused on this one. He was also getting ready to prep the other one and do that. And he was gone. He would probably make, one of those Westerns, be done and then be off somewhere else making another one fairly quickly. And
You're absolutely right. When you look at the filmography of some of the old directors who were under contract, they churned them out and they had bodies of work as a result. And they also had, like when we talked about the Marx Brothers, they had some great movies in their canon and some that were not as good, but they had the chance to keep working at their craft over and over again.
You're probably familiar with because you just mentioned Casablanca and your piano, the great director Michael Curtiz, who not only directed Casablanca, he actually directed the Gus Kahn biopic, I'll See You in My Dreams. Casablanca, the sort of romantic wartime thing, he did a biopic, Gus Kahn. He did The Comancheros, incredible Western. I mean, his filmography is unbelievable. But again, he didn't just, part of it was probably that the studios probably had them do certain kind of stuff. And again, like Billy Wilder was smart that he didn't just say, I'm only going to do comedies.
Sure.
Like, compare his career, because if you look at all the great sort of careers of comedy people, the careers lasted about 10 years. That's pretty, like, compare the career of Preston Sturges and the career of Billy Wilder. Okay, Preston Sturges made, to me, what is one of the finest movies ever made, which is Sullivan's Travels. Okay, amongst others. But he made like one movie that wasn't a comedy.
I think the best comparison would be a Ron Howard or a Steven Spielberg, who have great bodies of work in multiple genres, stretching themselves. Yes. Yeah, that was Billy Wilder.
Some Like It Hot, but he did Sunset Boulevard.
I know, it's extraordinary, really,
right.
Isn't
and
it?
You don't see that so much kind of today. Although you do see, it is funny because I think it's partly to do with the cancel culture and the Me Too thing and everything. And I think I've read, I guess it's Todd Phillips was saying, that Todd Phillips, all he made were like wacky comedies, right? But, that had all kinds of offensive humor and everything. And Todd Phillips has basically said, you can't make those movies anymore. So then he made, The Joker,
and shows you what a terrific filmmaker he is.
It is, but if that whole thing hadn't happened,
I agree with you. You get stuck in a certain kind of success warp, right?
Right, and the same with his partner, Craig. They wrote some scripts together. Craig Mazin, I think they both wrote, Wedding Crashers, didn't they? Or he directed it.
Right. I don't know.
Craig Mazin, I think, might have written or been one of the writers. There were a few writers, but then like Craig Mazin wrote the Chernobyl. So, he went from doing these kind of offensive.
Isn't that something? I did not know that. That's really interesting. And, that to me is about the craft. It's so interesting. Stars today, if we have a conversation about movie stars, the lack of movie stars today, we just don't give. Tom Cruise and Leonardo DiCaprio are sort of the last of a breed of big movie stars because they have a bunch of movies that have been important movies but we're not honing and creating talent that can work ongoing and multiple. And there's, of course, people like the wonderful Andrew Garfield. If you look at him in Tammy Faye Baker and then you look at Eyes of Tammy Faye and then you look at him in Tick, Tick, Boom, which I think is one of, if not the best movie of the year, you get a good sense of just what I'm talking about. But we need to do more of that if we're going to hope to sort of have a new crop of movie stars.
Well, do you think part of that, because like Terry and I have talked about this, do you think part of the allure of the movie star, one of the reasons it's a little bit died, it kind of goes through the same thing about the Academy Awards, that in the old days, like movie stars were a little more mysterious. You didn't see them. You never, that's why the Academy Awards now doesn't quite work so much anymore, because in the old days, that was the only time that you would actually see real live movie stars going to the Academy. Now, they have Instagram account, they're everywhere. And I'm wondering, that it doesn't have anything to do with the talent, but there's no mystery anymore about movies other than, George Clooney and I don't know, is Leonardo DiCaprio even on social media? I never hear anything, so again, they have that little bit of a veil around them.
Well, I think that there's a definite truth in creating a mystique around a star, but now that movies and television have often become interchangeable, it has allowed people of, extraordinarily lesser talent from YouTube stars and stuff like that to emerge as celebrities. So the word celebrity is where your mystique comes in. There's no sense of mystique by and large anymore. Everyone's dirty laundry is out and ripe for the telling. But I will say that I think a strong reason is just consumer behavior. I think consumers are just changing, and that is, I have a lot of data to back up my claim. Gen Zs and half of millennials just don't care about watching live events. They don't care about awards to the way we do. They don't care about movies in the same way that you and I do. We can lament, we could say how sad it is and talk about how, the demise of, and we have to accept the fact that, it's not an indictment on the Oscars. It's not an indictment on the Academy Awards. It's an indictment on consumer behavior and how they're changing and shifting. Hey, before we break, because we could talk for 6 hours easily and have done so.
I think you and I just need to do a show together, I think.
We've talked about it, and I think that's in our cards. But I want to go to...
If we do that, we're going to have a piano and everything. We're going to do a whole, it'll be like the Tonight Show, and I'll accompany you.
I love that. I love that. Well, I did promise that I would touch on Hollywood and Swine. I have to just say that, when you wrote that ongoing lampoon, and you were actually anonymous for quite a while, no one knew who you were, I was beside myself. It was so well written, so clever, so funny, and I wish that you picked it up again. I'm wondering, though, if without the anonymity, can it still have the bite that it has? And that's where...
It definitely have the bite, but here's one of the things that I have to give some credit to my partner, Will McCardle, who he was my writing partner, and we came up with that. And the guy is absolutely hysterically funny. Between the two of us, it was great. But I will tell you, a lot has changed in the media land. We were doing that in 2012, okay? And it was parody, and you really can't do parody anymore on the internet. It's very... because there's, the only place that can really still do parody is The Onion, because they started doing it like at the beginning of the internet, and they were like the first there, and they did it. You can't, like we did, probably the most famous story that we did was and we'd only been doing Hollywood and Swine for about a week, and it was the story about how Starbucks was banning all screenwriters from all 50,000 locations around the world, because it said screenwriters, just basically do nothing but sit in there all day and take up everybody else's space. So anyway, it was a very thing, and it went totally viral, okay? But the way that we were able to do that was, and it didn't work for every story. For some reason, that one caught on, I guess, because it was so in the pocket, and people thought, yeah, it's about time that they banned. Because you go into Starbucks, and everybody is in there writing a screenplay, no matter where you are. And so you can't do that. Like, in other words, we could go on Facebook. I could go on my Facebook thing, and I could post that story, and I'd go, "Hey, did you see this?" But they've really cracked down now, because unfortunately, parody falls into fake information now. So
right.
Really, really, you really just can't. And we were a little ahead of the game. Like, we weren't.
Oh yeah. Well, who has taken that mantle, I think, is Richard Rushfield.
Yeah, is he doing parody?
Well, no, but he writes with such an acerbic and witty style. I'm crazy about him. I think
he's great. He's like a smart guy that really writes. We were just lampooning.
Yeah, no, but you're smart that wrote too. But I'm saying his is on. It's not parody, certainly, but it's biting and it's entertaining. I guess.
I'd like to go work for the Ankler. I could do. Trust me, I could. I had that column at Variety that I wrote. Called Trademarks.
I love it. MARX.
I did that. And actually, I wanted to call. It's funny because Hollywood and Swine was much later than when I worked at Variety, but I went to Peter Barton. He said, "I'm going to let you do a humor column." I go, "Okay, great." And he go, "What do you want to call it?" And I said, "Hollywood and Swine." He goes, "No, we can't do that. We'll have to do something like." So he wouldn't let me. So if they had gotten Hollywood and Swine, I wouldn't have been able to do it on my own. So thank you, Peter Barton.
Thank you, Peter.
But the other, I don't know if we should mention this since it might hit too close to home, but we did, I think what kind of, and we actually, Jay Penske actually kind of sort of, they didn't buy Hollywood and Swine, but they made a deal with us that we were actually in Variety. We were on the back page of Variety, which was incredible. But we did write a story. We don't have to mention it, but we did write a story that unfortunately Yahoo News thought was a real story, and it literally went viral, and everybody thought it was real. So
let's not mention. It's too close to my home.
I know it is, so that's why we won't mention it. And then Nikki Fink then outed us. She found out who.
Oh, is that who outed you? It was Nikki.
It sort of killed the whole thing. But it was it was a fun project. So.
Well, Andy, again, before we break, music is such a big part of your life. We mentioned the marriage with of Gus and Groucho working together.
I mean, a nonfiction book about growing up with all these people.
Well, exactly.
My title is Groucho, Gus, Grace, and Me. So it's Groucho Marx, Gus Kahn, Grace Kahn, and me.
Who is Grace? Why Grace Kahn?
Because Grace was the wife of Gus Kahn, who basically kind of raised me and taught me everything I know.
No, but what about Groucho's wife?
No. She was the original Auntie Mame.
Well, that's why I'm asking the question. I didn't mean who's Grace, but I get it. I thought
because you have to remember, Gus Kahn died in 1941, and that you mentioned my book Royalties. I actually wrote. It's a novel, but it's all very loosely based on Groucho, Gus, and Grace, who I always suspected was in the middle of the. I always thought that maybe the two of them were both in love with her, but Gus got her because. Well, read the book, Royalties. It's available everywhere.
Well, I was just going to say, Andy, what's your website? Because people can learn about your book. They can learn about your photography.
AndyMarx.com.
MARX, AndyMarx.com.
Unless it's Neil who thinks it's MARKS.
Do me a favor, Andy. Can you take us out with a little ukulele? But it has to be Gus Kahn, something Gus Kahn.
It's going to be Gus Kahn. Who else is it going to be? Sammy Kahn? I mean, what do you want?
I love it.
Okay, how about a little... You going to join me?
I'm going to just listen.
Oh, it had to be you. Oh, I wandered around and finally found there's somebody who could make me be true. Could make me be true. Could make me be blue. Make me be blue. And even be glad just to be sad.
Thinking of you. Ba-dum, ba-dum.
Some others I've seen. Oh, might never be me.
Bum, bum. Ha ha.
Try to be boss or ever be cross. But they wouldn't do. No, they wouldn't do.
Aha.
Oh, nobody else gave me a thrill. With all your faults, I love you still.
Had to be you, wonderful you. It had to be you.
For nobody else.
Bum, bum. Bring it home.
Gave me a thrill. With all your faults, I love you still. It had to be you. A wonderful you. It had to be you. It had to be you. You.
And Andy, I cannot thank you enough for this time together. It's been wonderful. It's been wonderful. Of course, you're coming back. And before we do our own show, if you would like to learn more about my book and these type of stories, please do pick up a copy of Audienceology. It's available on Amazon or wherever books are sold. There's also an audio version. And if you want to check out a trailer, you can always go to KevinGetz360.com and check it out. Next time on our podcast, Don't Kill the Messenger, we'll welcome David Leitch and Kelly McCormick, the husband and wife director and producer team, who are billion-dollar filmmakers working on such pictures as John Wick, Atomic Blonde, Deadpool 2, Hobbs and Shaw, and the upcoming Bullet Train starring Brad Pitt. Until then, I'm Kevin Getz, and to you, our listeners, I appreciate you being part of the movie-making process. Your opinions matter. See you soon.